Hi, my name is Dean Schmidtke and I work with Technical Safety BC. I work in our Incident Investigations Department, and we investigate incidents that result from occurrences within our regulated technologies in the province. And we do this to learn and try to improve safety based off of the findings of our incident investigations. And I'm here today to present findings on 2 gas explosions that happened in the province. Talk a little bit about the investigations, what the findings were, and what we can do with the findings to help make things safer in this province. The first incident I want to bring up was a natural gas explosion that occurred in Comox in November 2021. The explosion happened at a military barracks, and 28 people were injured. The incident was a result of a gas leak which stemmed from some construction work which struck an underground gas line. There was some construction work to update the exterior of this building, and part of that gas work was excavation to put in some new perimeter drains. And in preparation for this, the companies and the contractors involved actually did took the steps what they believed to be necessary to do this safely. They made a BC1 call, they identified where the lines were. They even went so far as to expose them by hand through the area that they were working to try to avoid hitting them. What happened is the exposed gas line was in the area of the excavator. The excavator was working too close to the line, and the mistake was made and the line was hit, severing this 3/4 inch gas line, letting a lot of gas leaking directly towards the building, and not only the building but the mechanical room, which had its doors removed for the exterior renovation. So now we have a large gas leak going directly into this building. Panic ensues, and actions were taken to try to evacuate as many people out of this occupied building as possible. The gas eventually found a source of ignition, and an explosion occurred which did quite catastrophic damage. 28 people were injured. Luckily nobody was killed, but it was a very serious incident and could have resulted in even greater injury and or loss of life. The second incident I'm going to be sharing was another natural gas explosion that occurred in a home, a residence in Fernie, British Columbia, back in February 2022. Similarity, there was some groundwork happening with an excavator, and also similarity, there was steps taken to try to prevent gas line damage from happening. And in this case, there was a single family detached home, and the owner, who was also a contractor, was planning on expanding and putting a building in the rear of the property. To take the steps to put the foundation in, there was a gas line which was too close, so they had been working with the regional gas supplier to eventually identify and relocate this line prior to digging it up. What had happened is there had been a slight mistake, and there was a delay in the process of moving the line. So in the trying to keep things moving along in the construction project, they had an excavator who was just doing work within the vicinity of the line. They saw it, they knew where it was, they had exposed it, and it was identified. It was parallel to the trench. It was a steel line that they could see, the operator could see it, and they were working to dig a trench parallel to it, and the excavator in this process had actually incidentally contacted the line and pulled on it slightly. Now, it immediately didn't seem like anything significant had happened, but they took the right steps. They stopped the work, they walked around, and they looked for smells and is there anything they can see, that they can smell, that they can hear of a gas leak. They also immediately notified the gas utility as well, notifying them that they had contacted this line and they had stopped work. There was nothing immediately evident that there was a gas leak, but they still took the right steps. The gas company dispatched a team to go and address this. So the owner took some steps to try to prevent any further harm, and went into the house to try to extinguish any standing pilot lights and make sure that even though they couldn't smell or hear anything, if there was a gas leak, things would be safe. What they didn't realize is when the steel line was contacted by the excavator, that underground up at the house, there was a plastic elbow and a small gas line that had separated, which started a gas leak in the ground. It was winter time, it was in Fernie, there was snow cover, there was ice on the ground, and they couldn't see it, they couldn't hear it, and they couldn't smell it. But what was happening is the leaking gas was migrating through the ground up into the crawl space of this home, which also housed, the hot water tank and the furnace. So when the owner was standing in the doorway, it eventually caught ignition. The explosion blew the owner out from a doorway out into the yard, and it pushed the walls of the house out. The roof had collapsed, and there was actually a tenant who lived in the home inside at the time. The owner received some minor abrasions and cuts from the explosion and being thrown, and amazingly, the occupant inside the house was able to crawl out of a window and had virtually no harm to them whatsoever. They went to the hospital, like no physical injuries from the explosion, which was amazing and could have been so much worse. So that's just a quick summary of two incidents that we investigated involving natural gas, involving underground gas leaks, involving equipment working around underground gas lines. And our investigations found some similarities between them and some findings that we have identified and are trying to use to improve safety. First of it being that we are given our powers of the Safety Standards Act and the regulations under that Safety Standards Act to enforce safety within the province within our regulated technologies. Well, the gas safety regulations under the Safety Standards Act actually has some specific guidance and rules when it comes to digging around underground gas lines. These are legal obligations, and most of the companies and organizations that do this type of work may know about them, but some may not. We interviewed not only the operators in these two incidents, but also their direct supervisors, their managers, and others, and asked them if they knew of these rules, which were in the gas safety regulations and under the Safety Standards Act, and they didn't. So the rules pretty much say that a person must not excavate or cause any excavating to be done in the vicinity of a gas installation that in any way could be damaging or dangerous to the gas installation. It's a pretty broad rule, and it could be subjective depending on your background and your experience and the situation. So yeah, there is a rule, and most people aren't necessarily aware of it. And in these cases, neither of the operators or any of the contractors involved were aware that these existed. One of the next things that we found is there's a lot of really good advice, guidance around call before you dig, right? We want to know that there's hazards associated with underground utilities before you're doing work in these areas, and that's the first step to safely working around them. Review of line hit data from 2017 to 2019 showed that around 40%, almost half of the line hits that were identified, they had a BC1 call done. They knew there was lines there, and incidents still happened. So yes, doing BC1 call and knowing where the hazards are is the absolute first step. It's a must. But what can be done afterwards to try to continue to work safely around these underground utilities? One thing that the call before you dig isn't great at is it identifies utilities that are in the ground that are registered and associated with BC1 call, but what it doesn't do is they don't identify any privately owned services. So gas, electrical, you could have high voltage services or gas services that aren't part of the utilities network that could be in the ground. So you can do a BC1 call, you can get all of that information, but just because you don't see any additional information doesn't mean it's not there. So it's important to take those extra steps, utilizing other services, ground radar and other locating services to do a comprehensive job to make sure that you understand what's in the ground before you start to dig. Another thing we realized too is that an exposed line becomes a vulnerable line. So in both of these cases, the contractors did as they were intended to do things safe. They found them. They identified, well, they're here. What do we do? Now we expose them so that we can see them, so we can work safely around them. But when a line's in the ground and it has ground cover, it's essentially protected. And once you've exposed it, it can now become susceptible to other mechanical damage. You know, a construction site can have many things going on, other pieces of equipment, things falling off of roofs, and once it's exposed, it can become more susceptible to that type of damage and hazards associated with the gas leaks. So even though there may not be any specific rules or guidance around it, taking some considerations for things like adding physical protection. Is there a way to, now that we've exposed this, to protect it from other hazards which are around it? Or increasing the visibility. You know, some gas lines are made yellow so that they're highly visible, but if it's a steel gas line or other materials, it may not necessarily be. So is there ways to increase its visibility so those working around it understand what's there, and to try to take those extra steps to be safe around them, maintaining distances. You know, in both of these cases, the operators knew the lines were there and could see them in line of sight from where they were operating, and when interviewed and we asked about them, felt that they were operating safe around these lines because they could see them. They were in their line of sight, which gave them the confidence to work closer to them than maybe they would have if they knew there was one in the area that they couldn't see. So there's really good guidance around how far you stay away from a proposed gas line or electrical service when you know the area it's in, but then once you can see it, try to maintain those distances and avoid any risk of contacting these. Another thing we found is it can be really helpful to anticipate a line hit, and that's something that may seem a bit strange, but we do all of this work and this effort to avoid hitting an underground service. But stopping and thinking, well, what if we do? Is there anything we can do to, help protect or be safer around it? For example, the Comox incident. In this incident, the line had been exposed. They had done all this work to try to avoid hitting the line. Now, if they had anticipated a potential line hit, there's a lot of other factors that you can consider and having a look. And in this instance, the line was in a location which was very close to the mechanical room of this building, which housed lots of equipment, potential sources of ignition. There was a path for gas to get into the building, which was unobstructed. And the building itself, it was occupied at the time. So we had a lot of potential injuries if something was to go wrong. We don't want to anticipate things going wrong, but maybe if there's considerations taken, maybe that work can happen at a different time, or maybe extra steps can be taken beyond what the minimum requirements are for safe work around this. Things like wind direction, migration, sources of ignition, how many people are in the area, what work is happening in the area. These could help greatly reduce some of the potential injuries and impact from one of these incidents. Another thing that could be helpful as well is not only anticipating the line hit, but understanding the hazards associated with gas in the first place. You don't have to be an expert in the industry, but some simple things may help make decisions around how to do things safer. Things like understanding what are the upper and lower flammability ranges of gas. Like there's, like natural gas, for instance, you may only need 5 to 15% of gas in the air. So what may be considered a small leak may end up being a very hazardous situation, or maybe even more hazardous than a very large leak if the concentrations get too high to ignite, which may be counterintuitive. But understanding that a little bit of gas in a lot of air is a very dangerous scenario in some instances, as well as the specific gravity. So natural gas rises, but propane vapor is heavier than air and it sinks. So where is it going to go when it comes out? Natural gas, if you're outdoors, it will typically dissipate into the air and result in a maybe not so hazardous of a situation. But if you have a propane leak and it's settling in low areas and you're in an area with, it can't get away, it can pool in areas, it can go into storm drains and doesn't necessarily dissipate. It can sit there for a while, which can cause a different set of hazards. So understanding a little bit more about the gas itself you're working around can help make those decisions to how to help prevent when you anticipate a potential gas leak. Is there other steps that can be taken? Can we make the area less occupied? Can we extinguish any potential sources of ignition? And obviously follow the guidance if a gas leak ever happens to notify the gas utilities, how to evacuate and make things safe. But if you take some of these steps upstream, you may be able to help prevent a real disastrous situation. So to review, quick summary of some of the things that we had brought up today involving these two incidents is that we found that most current digging guidance stops around the identification of a gas line. Once a gas line is exposed, it can become more vulnerable to damage, and there's potentially steps that can be taken to mitigate any hazards associated with a line hit. As well as, anticipate a gas leak. What if things don't go right? Is there things that we can do to help minimize risk, minimize impact and injury, prevent damage? And also, excavator operators, those doing ground disturbance, when you do see a line, don't become complacent and try to still maintain safe distances, even though it's there and you can see it. Working closer to it is going to be more hazardous and is potentially going to cause accidents that can result in serious situations like we've shared with you today. So I hope that you found this session informative and you can take some of this information and apply it to your daily routine and work and businesses and just help make things safer out there. Have a safe day.